What's going on, everyone? This is the Professor, and today I'm going to be doing iOS versus Android. This is not going to be some versus video, which is better, iPhone or Android, that kind of stuff. This is going to be a comparison, kind of. It's going to be pretty much pros and cons of each operating system, based off of my experience that I've had. So, I'm going to start with iPhone. I started off with an iPhone 4S, and then that got stolen, so I upgraded to an iPhone 5S, and that leads to about right now. And I've got the OnePlus One now, which will be the Android that I'll be comparing it against. So the pros for the iPhone: jailbreaking is super simple. Well, really, I haven't messed around with rooting too much. I haven't had a need yet, but jailbreaking is quite simple. It's pretty much just follow the instructions on screen, and that's about it. And the things you can do with it are pretty amazing. Now, I'm sure you can do some pretty amazing things with Android too, but I haven't done that kind of stuff yet. I've only had my OnePlus One for about a month, so jailbreaking super simple. The tweaks on Cydia it's not too hard to find decent stuff on there, but it can be kind of overwhelming if you're not used to that kind of environment. You just have lists and just huge, massive lists of well, not features. It could be features, but of things you could just download for your iPhone. Like, for instance, on my iPhone 5S, I've made it look like Android before. I made it look like Windows Phone. I made it look like an Apple Watch. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with it. I'm sure you can. There's got to be some way to do it with Android. I just haven't discovered that kind of stuff yet. But on to the next thing with iOS. It is a lot more reliable than Android, and of course, based on my experience. And this kind of ties into it. iPhone, iOS, the whole combination being better quality in general. Because, you know, Apple, it's their operating software, and it's also their phone. So, naturally, they're going to design them to work together extremely well. Whereas with Android, you have one operating system, and then you have tons of manufacturers who make different size phones, different powered phones, all that kind of stuff. It's a different experience kind of with each phone, is what I've gathered from research. With iOS, it just seems more smooth. Everything's more fluid. There's no hiccups or stutters or anything like that. It just works, really. Also, the apps that's on the App Store for iOS, I think they're a lot better quality than the apps I've seen on the Android store, because they're optimized for iOS, and they're specifically designed to work on iPhones. So, and that goes back to the point earlier that it's all Apple stuff, so it's gonna work together real well. You know, there are good things for iOS, but you know, there's everything has their cons to it. I know iPhone, iOS may be perfect solution together, but I don't think so. So first thing, one thing I have not missed after going to Android, iTunes. Man, I hated iTunes. First thing, I don't know why, just for me though, but I haven't seen too many other people have this problem. iTunes, every time I try to install it on my computer, my laptop, it just didn't work. It kept missing some. It kept throwing error codes. I searched up those error codes. It's missing some kind of file. Just reinstall it, it'll be fine. Nope, still did the same thing. Get the file from a good working computer or download it off the internet. Nope, still wouldn't work. I don't know what the problem was, but it just didn't work for me. And I think the Windows version of iTunes doesn't work as well as what I've seen with it running on the Macs. It just seems sluggish, slow. I don't know. It's just not an enjoyable experience. Another thing with iOS software is iCloud. I hate iCloud with a passion. Specifically, the iCloud backup. I got tired of using iTunes because, it wouldn't work most of the time. So I thought, well, iCloud backup's there, why not use it? Well, it took about 8 hours to back up my iPhone 4S. And I think that was an 8 gig version of the iPhone 4S. My iPhone 5S was a 16 gig version, but I never did iCloud backup with it. On the 4S, it took like 8 hours. It wasn't full. I think it only had like 6 gig. Well, I guess it's kind of full. No, maybe 5 gig of space used. And it took forever, and then one time I had to restore my iPhone. I don't remember why, but I did. So I restored it, and I clicked on Restore from iCloud Backup. We don't have a backup for... We can't do this. It's not going to work. So I lost everything there. Even though when I logged into my iCloud account and everything, oh yeah, there's a backup there. But not very fun. Another bad thing goes back to the everything's controlled by Apple. That makes it work real well, but that also limits to what you can do. If you're not jailbroken, which I know a lot of your typical mainstream users are not going to be jailbreaking or anything. They're not that kind of user. They're just going to be using the phone, using the apps just like normal, like Apple wants you to do. But with that, you get no customization at all. Of course, everyone knows that. You can change your background, and that's about it. There's not really much more to that. Android, you at least you can get like live wallpaper. There's different kind of locks you can put on your phone. You can download themes. At least you can with CyanogenMod. But also, another thing with that phone, I haven't really run into this problem. Well, I did it on the iPhone, and it's not exactly software related, but there's a lot more, you have more limitations when it comes to storage space. Of course, there's no SD card slot or anything, and I only had a 16 gig iPhone Max that I've ever had, but I filled that iPhone 5S up so many times with pictures and all kinds of things on vacation. I had to go delete tons of apps because I didn't bring my computer on vacation with me, so kind of out of luck there. At least with some Android phones, you can get an SD card slot, but there's not one on the OnePlus One. But I've got 64 gig of space on the OnePlus One. I've only used 5 up so far with all my pictures and everything. So that's nice. So that's not exactly software oriented, but I guess now we'll move on to Android. Now, one of the great things with iOS, it's simple. Anybody can pick that thing up and pick an iPhone up and use it, no problem. Which would make you think, okay, it's a bad thing to have a complex operating system on Android. Well, I think it's a great idea. So I'm going to put that under the pro list. There's a lot more options, which means if something goes wrong, you can fix it most of the time. Since you have so many phones running on this one operating system, things are probably going to go wrong sometimes, and you need to have the settings to be able to fix it. Which is why being complex is actually not a bad thing. Having a lot more settings than iPhone ever has. Like, for instance, my LTE data wasn't working. Okay? You can fix that. There's APN settings you can go through. There's all kinds of settings for cell broadcast you can go through. You can edit the APN settings. You can't do any of that with iPhone and iOS. This is kind of going back, again, to more hardware kind of thing. Android has bigger screens. I didn't realize how much I would like that until I got a OnePlus One. I thought the iPhone 5S screen was pretty big and it was pretty good screen and everything. Then I switch over to the OnePlus One and the colors are so vibrant, everything's a lot better. Now when I go back to hold my iPhone 5S, it just fits in my hand like this. It's kind of little. Why did I ever use this for like 2 years? But getting back to the software side of it, Android's got a lot more features, of course. They're not locked up by their manufacturers, like the iPhone's locked by Apple. I like having the ability to apply themes right out of the box without having to jailbreak or anything. I guess that's all I have to say about that one. But another thing I really love about Android, there's for the multitasking kind of screen, I guess. There's a kill all switch pretty much. It closes all your apps, you're done. You don't have to sit there and swipe up. Wait, swipe up. Wait a little bit for the next app to move over. Swipe up. It's really nice just to be able to hit one button, they're all gone. The other thing I love about Android, it's really easy to add media onto the phone. You know, with iOS, iPhone, you gotta plug it in, you gotta go through iTunes, do all that nice stuff. The only thing you can get to is pictures. If you just plug it in straight into a Windows computer, you can just get pictures off of it. With Android, you have access to pretty much everything, the whole file system. You can put in pictures, you can put in your music, movies, books, all kinds of stuff in there. And you don't have to have any extra software to do it. Very nice thing to have. A good thing about Android, there's no pre-installed apps. On iOS, Apple loads it down with junk like Newsstand, iBooks, whatever they call it. You have different iTunes. You have the iTunes Store. You have the App Store. You have Stocks app, stuff that you're never gonna use, but it's still taking up space on your phone. With most Android phones, I'll say most because some of them are notorious for adding their own junk, but from the OnePlus One experience, there's no extra apps installed. You just get Android. It comes with basic Google services, and that's it. And if you, let's say I needed a notes app, you can just go on the Play Store and get something done. But that kind of leads us into our cons. Because they're not pre-installed, I kind of am under the assumption that you're going to take up more space that way, because pre-installed apps are usually meant for the phone, well, at least in the case of iOS. So Apple's probably got those apps to a bare minimum when it comes to storage size. With Android, my simple notepad app is about 50 meg. Something I don't think would be that big on Apple. I don't know for sure, I may be wrong, but as of now, that's my impression of it. Another thing with Android, just picking up an Android phone and casually using it, you'll see it's not as smooth as iOS is. There's a lot more stutters, even though the OnePlus One's got a really powerful processor in it. It still stutters every now and then. I think that's more along the lines of software oriented rather than hardware limitations. You'll see hiccups and just scrolling up and down a page. It just seems much more fluid when it's on iOS. But when you're on Android, it's just not as fluid. Another really bad thing about Android, you gotta restart it almost every day. Or at least my OnePlus One is that way. And if it's not every day, it's every few days. Because even if you get some task killer app or whatever, it's still not gonna be the same as a full reboot. So I find myself rebooting my OnePlus One every day. If it's not every day, it's every 2 days. It's not a pain in the butt, but it's just an added inconvenience. Now granted, I did have to reboot my iPhone 5S, but that's because I loaded it down with all kinds of themes and customization. For the typical user, you won't have to be doing that. Another thing this kind of pertains to the apps on Android. I just find they're not as smooth as they are on iOS. I mean, if you think about it, if you're making a app for the iPhone, for iOS, you maybe you really don't have too much work cut out for you. You've only got a few phones you're going to support. You can say, okay, we only support iOS 7 and up. Alright, so that limits, you've only got a few phones to worry about. When you're making stuff for Android, of course you have to worry about what version of operating software you making it for, but you've also got hundreds of phones out on the market that you need to optimize for, and they're all different kind of screen sizes. You may have like a 6-inch phone, and you may go all the way down to like a 4-inch phone. If you're developing for iOS, you either have, I don't know the exact screen sizes, you got like iPhone 5 screen size or iPhone 6 or 6 Plus now. So they're adding a few more on there, but it's still not as bad as having to develop for Android. And I've kind of noticed that some apps on my OnePlus One don't look really well at all, because they're not really optimized for this kind of screen size. It's either too big or way too small. So I think that's about it. That's all I had to say about between the two operating softwares as of now. I've had my OnePlus One for about a month now, and I mean, it's been alright so far. I'm running into some troubles with data, but of course, getting it from OnePlus over in China, or wherever they're at. I don't know if it's a Chinese I think it's a Chinese company, I don't know. But getting an unlocked phone is kind of more of a pain when it comes to using it on a carrier that really doesn't like that, because you didn't buy it from them. So of course they're not going to make it easy for you to just simple pop in the SIM and be done with it. No. So I've had a few problems, like my LTE data in general not working, and then I could only connect to HSPA Plus. Finally I got LTE working, but the only way I did that was plug the SIM card into an AT&T locked phone, and then just put it right back into the OnePlus, and that's how I got mine working, if you've ever got that kind of a problem. But so yeah, iOS compared to Android, I mean, each has their strengths and each has their weaknesses, just like everything else. And this isn't meant to be iOS versus Android, which one is better. I think they're both great operating systems. They both have they offer unique experiences. It just depends on what you want. If you want more complex operating system and more freedom, then yeah, go with Android. But if you want locked down Apple but quality and everything smooth and just works, yeah, iOS, iPhone. But ultimately it's up to you. What do you want to do with your phone? What do you want your phone to do for you? So that's going to be it for today. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys later. What's going on, everyone? This is the Professor, and today I'm going to be doing iOS versus Android. This is not going to be some versus video, which is better, iPhone or Android, that kind of stuff. This is going to be a comparison, kind of. It's going to be pretty much pros and cons of each operating system, based off of my experience that I've had. So I'm going to start with iPhone. iPhone, iOS, the whole combination being better quality in general. Because, you know, Apple, it's their operating software, and it's also their phone. So naturally, they're going to design them to work together extremely well. Whereas with Android, you have one operating system, and then you have tons of manufacturers who make different size phones, different powered phones, all that kind of stuff. It's a different experience kind of with each phone is what I've gathered from. That's about it, and the things you can do with it are pretty amazing. Now I'm sure you can do some pretty amazing things with Android too, but I haven't done that kind of stuff yet. I've only had my OnePlus One for about a month, so jailbreaking super simple. The tweaks on Cydia it's not too hard to find decent stuff on there, but it can be kind of overwhelming if you're not used to that kind of environment. You just have lists and just huge, massive lists of well, not features. It could be features. We started off with an iPhone 4S, and then that got stolen, so I upgraded to an iPhone 5S, and that leads to about right now. And I've got the OnePlus One now, which will be the Android that I'll be comparing it against. So the pros for the iPhone: jailbreaking is super simple. Well, really, I haven't messed around with rooting too much. I haven't had a need yet, but jailbreaking is quite simple. It's pretty much just follow the instructions on screen, but of things you could just download for your iPhone. Like, for instance, on my iPhone 5S, I've made it look like Android before. I made it look like Windows Phone. I made it look like an Apple Watch. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do with it. I'm sure you can. There's got to be some way to do it with Android. I just haven't discovered that kind of stuff yet. But on to the next thing with iOS. It is a lot more reliable than Android, and of course, based on my experience. And this kind of ties into it